It says, I think it says preparing.
Hey, I think we got it.
Nice.
Looks like it's running. All of our technical ignorance didn't stop us. That's good.
Yeah.
What's up, everybody? Whoever's watching, glad that you joined. Glad that you tuned in. Me and Andy are just going to talk about scripture because we're sitting around in our houses and we don't have anything to do. And we like to do this anyways. And we know a lot of people are at home and looking for encouragement, looking for Bible study stuff. You may already have found a lot of good things like this, sharing with us because we're enjoying that stuff too. But we thought these conversations that we have where we just like to open up the Bible and talk about it and kind of exchange ideas, ask questions, explore it, think about what it means for our lives. These conversations might be nice for other people to enjoy too. So we're just going to kind of talk and share ideas back and forth. And we're going to be particularly looking at the book of First Peter. So if you want to open up a Bible to First Peter, that'll probably help you to be able to follow along with the discussion. So, all right, Andy. So what do you, we're going to do kind of an intro overview, big picture message, and what's the value of First Peter for us. So what have you found in First Peter that's really helped you, or that what the book's all about, or whatever?
Yeah, good. And just for everybody that's participating, if you guys have any comments or questions, we'll try to, we're not like we're good at this yet, but if you got something, we'll try to address it. If we don't know the answer, we'll just totally ignore you. So that's how it'll go. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I think the letter that Peter wrote has multiple ways to use it for our benefit. Like there's all kinds of lessons in it and ways that you can approach the book. But I always like when a writer tells us the reason they wrote. I think anytime in the New Testament or anywhere that you have a statement of, hey, here's the purpose of this writing, it's worth paying attention to. And I think that's especially the case with this letter. At the end of the letter in 1 Peter 5, verse 12, Peter wrote, "Through Silvanus, our faithful brother, for so I regard him, I have written to you briefly, exhorting and testifying that this is the true grace of God. Stand firm in it." A couple of things. Number one, Peter believed this was a brief letter, so that's good. I mean, preachers always think that. I think it takes like 16 minutes to read this book, but I think it's interesting that he uses these phrases. He's exhorting and testifying in this letter. Exhortation, telling people, hey, you can do this. We got this. Like spurring people on is the purpose of this letter. But the other one is testimony. And if he's testifying about the true grace of God, the implication is there were false graces being taught. There were false ideas about grace going around in his time. And he had to step up and say, no, as an apostle, I'm going to testify to you like what the real grace of God is. So that's helpful for us as we read through this book. And then the exhortation to stand firm in it. It implies that grace is not the easiest thing, which kind of goes counter to a lot of ways people talk about grace these days.
Yeah.
Grace seems like the easiest thing in the world to stand in, but Peter has to tell people in the grace, stand firm in it. Like this is important and it's not going to be easy. So we kind of have to ask the question, why is that the theme of the book? And how does this book express the true grace of God in ways that maybe we're not used to?
To your point, like I think if most people, if they were going to choose a metaphor to talk about like a person's relationship to grace, it probably wouldn't be stand firm in it. It'd be like lay down and relax in it or something. Sure. It's just it's a totally different posture and attitude, the way that he talks about grace here at the end versus, almost like lay down on a beach and let the waves of grace just kind of wash over you. And I know maybe there's other places in scripture that kind of sort of talk that way about grace, but this is is pretty striking because it's a really different way of talking about it and even visualizing our relationship to the grace of God.
Yeah, very good. I think it's also a surprise at the end of the letter to hear him say that, because when you're reading through the letter, it doesn't seem like that's his focus. I mean, he's talking about things that sometimes in our day almost are put in contrast with grace. You keep hearing him talk about submission and suffering and obedience. And anymore, like, I think when you hear people who really care about grace and talk a lot about it, you often hear them saying that grace almost like is in spite of those things, or in place of those things. Like, grace means we don't have to be that obedient, or we don't really have to submit. It's there for when we don't. And so we kind of have to ask, well, what is Peter trying to say about grace in this book, and why is it true, and why do we need to stand firm in it? You have some thoughts about that?
Well, I guess I'll just, especially the point you were saying, where when you read the book, if you ripped out verse 12 and you read through the whole book and you ask somebody, hey, what's First Peter about? Maybe I shouldn't say somebody. I know if you asked me many times, whenever I'm reading through or teaching through First Peter, it's like, this book's about suffering, or maybe suffering and hope. And I guess I've tried to think about, and I mean, I totally agree with you. Like, obviously, what Peter says here, this is what the book's about. So it just helps us reframe all that stuff, suffering and resisting temptation and submission and all that kind of stuff. I've just tried to think about what's messed up with me that I could miss it, that's what Peter was talking about, especially because he mentions grace a number of times throughout the letter. It's not like it's the first time he even uses the word, but for whatever reason, I'm not reading this book, and my natural inclination is not to see it that way. My natural inclination is to focus more on suffering and hardship and future hope and all that kind of stuff. So I've kind of thought about that for myself, why for many times when I would teach this book or read this book, this is the way I thought about it, was not the way Peter says he was thinking about it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So for people that are maybe trying to take some notes or like think about this, you said he uses this word grace a few different times. It's not always translated grace. But the places in the book where it's mentioned are chapter 1, verse 2, chapter 1, verse 10, 1:13, 2:19, 2:20, 3:7, 4:10, 5:5, and then something that I can't read. Is it 5?
5:10, I think.
Yeah, 5:10, and then 5:12. That's right.
Yeah. Well, to your point, like it's surprising. I mean, the one that stands out to me is 2:19. For this finds favor or grace. This finds grace, if for the sake of conscience toward God, a person bears up under sorrows when suffering unjustly. So when I suffer injustice for God's sake, that's a grace that finds favor. And
then in verse 20, he goes so far as to say it finds grace with God. It's almost like Peter saying, hey, you want to give God a gift? Like, you want to give God a grace? By you suffering unjustly, it gives God a grace because of your association with him and your identity. So there's some ways that Peter's going to use the word that are really, I think, cool and interesting. So let me get at the basis of like my conclusion about the way Peter's using grace differently than we sometimes do.
Okay.
I think we normally talk about grace only when it comes to initially being saved, like our forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
God gave me grace by forgiving me. And Peter will talk about that for sure. But I think what gets missed a lot is not just salvation, but identification. Like, the grace in this book is that we get to be God's people. Like, we get to be the proclaimers of his righteousness in chapter 2. We get to be the bricks in his building. We get to be the representatives in this world. And here's the deal. That's not going to be easy. That gift to be the holy people of God and to be the children of God is going to be excruciating for you guys. That's why you got to stand firm in it. You've got to accept the sanctification that comes with the salvation and see that as the gift in your life. And for a long time, that's not how I thought about grace. I thought of it only in terms of my initial salvation and forgiveness, and not my identification with God and my sanctification and my purpose in the world. But I think as we read through the book, we're going to see Peter like continually promoting that idea. That's the true grace of God. And that's why you got to stand firm in it. And somebody that tells you you don't have to be sanctified and you don't have to live that life because you've got grace has missed the point of true grace.
Right. And I think it seems to me most people get that on a heart level already, because if you talk about the best gifts or the things people enjoy or appreciate the most, it's usually relationships, it's being accepted by somebody, it's maybe getting a new position at work or something like that, like identity shaping kinds of moments or things that happen in your life. Not, oh, so and so gave me like, you know, a cool shirt or something, like not a transaction in other words, but it is that thing of identification, which is what you're saying. That's a greater grace than any particular gift that we could receive, but it's a change in your person, it's a change in your identity, it's a change in your place in the world. It's way harder, but it's way richer and better too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, an illustration of that would be somebody wanting to get a job because they want to get something, you know, like I want a paycheck, I want to be taken care of. Like God's going to gift us, like we're going to read in chapter 1, we have an inheritance that's undefiled. There's something in this for us. There's good gifts in this. But if you think about, like, say somebody ended up getting a job or having a purpose in this world where they got to represent a company or an organization that they really believed was doing amazing things in the world. I mean, part of the gift or the grace wouldn't just be what you get from it, but what you give to it, and the, you know, the association you have with that purpose in the world. So,
which I think that I think I'm right about this. I may have forgotten a time or two, but the way Peter says it in chapter 1, verse 2, which a lot of times you just read standard greeting, grace and peace. That's what they all start with. Mm-hmm. But his says, may grace and peace be yours in the fullest measure or multiplied to you. And I love that idea. And if I'm not mistaken, it's just 1st and 2nd Peter and Jude that use that last little thing. I think they're the only place in the New Testament where that's said. But it's the idea like grace isn't this one-time gift you receive, but it's this thing that happens and is happening and is multiplying, has a multiplying effect in your life. And that's a pretty incredible, that's a really great gift, not just one that you receive one time and is going to decay, but one you receive and it's going to expand and grow and become something better. Is awesome.
Very good. In fact, in chapter 1, one of the times he uses the word grace is in 1:13, when he says, prepare your minds for action, keep sober in spirit, fix your hope completely on the grace. Then he speaks of it in future terms, to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Peter was somebody that believed we'd already received grace. We were currently receiving graces. We could find grace in the eyes of God and give grace to God by our life. And there was a future grace coming. So that idea of expansion is really key, I think, in the book. Good point.
I love that.
So, I mean, I think there's probably a lot more to say about that. We'll talk about that as we study through the book. Are there other things like in your mind that are ways to approach this book or themes to notice that stand out to you?
I think extending out and thinking about why he would emphasize the true grace in 5:12, he says, stand firm in it. And in the very next phrase, he says, she who is in Babylon, chosen together with you, sends you greetings. And so does my son, Mark, in 5:13. And to me, this ties back to the very, very, very first sentence of the book in chapter 1 and verse 1, where it says, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who reside as exiles, aliens, sojourners, whatever somebody's translation says. So at the beginning and end, he brings out the idea of Christians living in exile. And I don't know, I've never been totally convinced in my mind whether he's addressing this in terms of you guys have lost your homes and you're literally, or I should say, spatially refugees.
Right.
Or I think what I like better is the idea that since God has chosen you and made you his children, made you his special people in the world, you guys are exiles to everybody. Sure. Your families don't think about you the same way. Friends don't think about you the same way. Your place in the world economy, your place in politics, your place in social events and the things that normal people do, like going and getting drunk, and now they're surprised because you're like an exile to them. And that theme of exile is really potent throughout the book, I think, and I think explains a lot of the emphasis that Peter places on here's what you have in God and here's how you relate to the world because of that. And it's going to be kind of weird and pretty different than the way you used to relate to the world, and it's going to be different than the way the world relates to itself. And kind of grabbing onto that identity is hard, except when you go back to the Old Testament and remember that all of God's favorite people have been exiles. Abraham was a sojourner and didn't have a place to call his own. All the people of God throughout time have been these people who are outsiders, who are exiles, who are sojourners. So that's a pretty helpful way for me of thinking about this theme of you need to stand firm in the true grace of God. Well, why, Peter? What's the big tension or problem that everybody's facing? Well, it's hard being weird. It's hard being an outsider. It's hard being an exile. It's hard having everybody tell you you're a loser and how you're living your life is stupid and you shouldn't be doing that. And so you need to stand firm in the goodness and the grace of God so that you hold on to your exile status, knowing what you have in God, and don't get sucked back into the world.
Yeah, that's so great. I mean, that's such a good point. And going back to is this spatial, dispersion? Is this referring to in the book of Acts when the saints were scattered from Jerusalem and went all over the place? And I think the answer could be both things. Kind of reminds me, there's strength when you're together. So when all the saints were in Jerusalem and the church was thriving, even though there was persecution, they could go back to their own companions in Acts and like stir each other up. But when they got scattered and churches maybe were smaller, you were living in caves, you were like wandering and not really sure where home was. Think about how much you'd miss what you'd had and the strength in it. And so this parallels Peter when he was with Jesus and with the other apostles. Jesus had told them, you guys are going to be scattered this night, like when things go down. And Peter, by the way, you're going to mess up, dude. Like you're going to not have the strength you thought you had. When they were all together in the garden, he pulled his sword out. But as soon as he found himself kind of by himself by the fire there, that servant girl got him to curse and swear and deny that he knew the Lord. I really think that has a bearing on this book. That's in Peter's mind. Hey, you all, whether it's spatial or whether it's just the nature of living in a world that you're not comfortable with, you're going to feel at times weak without understanding the grace of God and without understanding the calling that we've been called by. I think we'll see that, especially when we get to chapter 3. There's some cool stuff that Peter talks about that relates back to some things David did in his life where he messed up for the same reasons. But I was thinking about this in the second letter that Peter wrote, 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 12. I do think there's some things that go together with these letters. And I suppose you and I will talk through both of them.
Yeah.
But in chapter 1, verse 12 of the second letter, he says, therefore, I will always be ready to remind you of these things, even though you already know them and have been established in the truth which is present with you. That word there, established, stands out to me because it's the same word Jesus used in Luke chapter 22, verse 32, when Peter was told he was going to deny the Lord. And Jesus said, I've prayed for you that your faith will not fail. But when you return to me again, like he knew Peter would repent, strengthen your brothers, like establish your brothers, same word. And I have to imagine that when Peter was writing these letters, he could think about all the temptations we would be going through because we didn't fit. Because when you get to chapter 3, you're in a marriage that's unequal. And the person you're married to, some women are married to men that don't obey the word, or you're a slave and your master is not good. And you feel burdened.
Yeah.
The thoughts in this book and the things he expresses and the exhortations he gives are meant to strengthen people to not fail and to live their purpose. So applicable right now when some of us are not getting to see our fellow Christians every week like we want. Just so many good things there.
Yeah, absolutely. It really struck me the way you were talking about, like taking it even into the garden, he pulls out the sword. Like really in that moment, Peter, like you said, for one, he was there with his brothers. So he's bold and he's all that stuff. he also was not really following after Jesus. He was really following after the men of the world. They all came with clubs and swords and all this stuff to Jesus. And Peter said, "Oh, okay, cool. That's what we're doing." So he pulls out his sword too.
Right.
And then whenever everything fell apart and then they take Jesus away, Peter followed, but at a distance, and he really didn't follow Jesus. And I'm thinking about what he says in this book in chapter 2 in First Peter, where he says, listen, you need to remember you were called for this purpose. To your point, and I think you even mentioned something along that verse, that Peter forgot that he forgot, hey, when Jesus called me, he told me, back, get behind me, Satan. I remember that moment. He said, I've got to take up the cross, and I wasn't willing to do it. I wasn't, and you've got to, so that you don't forsake Jesus, so you don't give up on the goodness and the grace of God. You got to hang on. You got to make sure to be willing to follow Jesus wherever he leads. And that can be kind of tough, but that's where real strength lies, because whenever Peter found that, that's when he became strong and bold. And, he's just having a regular night's sleep the night before he's going to get his head chopped off in Acts 12. Like it's no big deal,
Right.
because he learned this thing of you got to follow Jesus, embrace that grace, and not try to save yourself in the world or whatever.
Great point. So for everybody watching, we're going to try to keep these about a half an hour. We've already gone like 20, 25 minutes, and time flies when for us, when we're talking about stuff like this. I have a couple more things to say about that, but I also noticed that some of you are making really great comments, and I'm not skilled enough to like read it and pay attention to what's going on. So we're going to get better at it, but we'll also go and look at all the good comments that you're making and maybe comment on them later. So thanks for participating, everybody. So have you ever thought about how to use First Peter as kind of like an evangelism handbook? Like I really think one of the things that he's doing in the letter is teaching Christians how to make an impact in the world that's difficult and dark, even though they're not feeling, they're going through their own trials, they're going through their own hardships, but there seems to be, Peter is saying, there's a way that you can use this moment in your life to reach the people around you. So I think we should look for that through the book, but here's just like a brief synopsis of that. In chapter 2, verse 9, when he talks about us being a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, now he gives the reason, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into marvelous light. Our world may look dark, but the reality, our spiritual reality, is we're in marvelous light. Mm-hmm. And we can speak these beautiful things about God to a world that's still dark. And then in verse 12, he's going to talk about our behavior, not just our words or our proclamations, but in verse 12, keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles. What that's going to result in chapter 3 is he says that some people are maybe going to ask you the reason for the hope that's in you. There in verse 15 of 3, but sanctify the Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that's in you. People are going to see us living with hope, proclaiming excellent things, behaving differently than other people in their trials. And somebody's going to walk up and be like, what's up with that? Like, why are you the way you are? I don't have to knock on doors. I don't have to figure out all the best things to say. But in these moments, proclamation and behavior. And God uses this to draw questions from people.
Yeah.
And then he's going to get to it again in chapter 4, and he's going to say, they're going to see you acting differently, not behaving like everybody else, to basically be excessive in your dissipation. This world's so hard. Let's just go party and get drunk and do whatever to feel comfortable. They're going to say, not see you participating and say, what? You're crazy. You're mad.
You're like an alien.
Yeah, you're like an alien. And then, but what's cool about what Peter says in chapter 4 is he says, these people will give an account to God. Like in chapter 3, he's going to say, you give an account to them. Why? Because someday they're going to give an account to God. And that's not to say oh, good, they're going to pay for their sins. I think that's Peter saying, no, think about it. These people are going to give an account to God. The only light they're going to see in this world might be you. Because they're going to have to give an account to God, you give an account to them, when they ask you why you're different.
Yeah.
So it's a great book. like to teach us how to live our lives in ways that are compelling to draw questions.
Yeah. And back in the passage you were highlighting in 2:9-12, seems to me verses 9 and 10 really hit on the theme of the grace that we have. We receive mercy to become this new people.
That's
We
right.
have purpose, all that stuff. Well, verse 11, he comes back to this exile theme.
Right.
But both of those little sections in 10, or sorry, in 9, it's you're proclaiming the excellencies. And then, like you said, in 12, it's you do things that glorify God. So these two kind of overarching ideas of grace and exile are what feed into our mission of helping others, serving others, honoring God.
Yeah.
Which is funny because I think most of the time, both grace and being an outsider or an exile are things that make us turn inward. Grace is all about me, what I get, what I can have. And we get things. I'm not trying to deny that, but we can make it a really selfish thing. Similarly, being an outsider, having a hard life, or being in isolation or an exile. I know I felt sorry for myself in these past few days of being in isolation or whatever. And certainly when we feel like outsiders or weirdos, we can just turn inward, think about myself. Oh, it's hard to be a Christian. Nobody in the world understands me. I have to go through so much. And that stuff's true. But if we're following Jesus, as Peter's telling us to in this book, like you're saying, it helps us pivot all that away from ourselves and to think about how we can help other people and how we can honor God and actually have purpose in grace and in our exile.
Yeah, very good. I think I saw a comment earlier from Casey Gray that said something about, like, in the book of Acts, the Christians really saw it as a grace to suffer for Christ. And that's actually Peter. Like, after Peter had denied him, he eventually learned, hey, no, this is great. Like, we get to be these people in the world no matter what it costs us and how people look at us.
Yeah.
And so that change of paradigm, that shift in what is the true grace of God in our lives, it's not just the mercy, like you pointed out there in 3:9-12. Yes, it's our past, but it's also our present, who we are right now. And it's also our future, because someday the Lord's going to visit again, and hopefully these people will glorify God because they've seen our behavior and heard our proclamations. So, hey, let's wrap it up so we don't go on too long for people that are gracious enough to spend time with us.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
And like Andy was saying, if you're watching this, and if you had an extra thought about some of these verses or some other things to add, throw it in there, because anybody who comes across this, they may find your comment more helpful than anything that God said in this video, or as helpful or whatever. And if you have a question about something that was said or something that you might think, just drop that in there too. And then next time whenever we pop on here, we might even be able to kind of talk about that a little bit. But thanks everybody for watching. This was cool. And thanks, man. This is really encouraging and fun.
And we'll try to do this soon, because I actually enjoyed this more than I thought I would. So we'll do it again soon, and we'll let you all know. But all right, love you all. God be with you all right now in whatever it is that you're going through. Daily prayers are happening from our Christians here, from me personally. But thank you for your encouragement, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Thanks, everybody.